Welcome back to the FantasyPros YouTube channel. My name is Derek Brown. On this week's video, we're going to run through 8 players, like we always do, that you need to get into your lineups and be higher than ECR on FantasyPros.com. Before we get to all this analysis and all these players, again, head over to the website right now, check out the primer where you can find all of this analysis I'm going to break down for you today in my weekly article. Let's dive in. Okay, first player up here on the docket, we got to talk about Matthew Stafford. Coming in at QB 15, currently on FantasyPros ECR, and I think he's going to finish as a top 12 quarterback. We've seen this since he's had all of his weapons back. Matthew Stafford has been very good. Since week 8, he is 12th in yards per attempt. He is 5th in passing touchdowns. And yes, I know people look at the Jets defense and they say, what do I do with Matthew Stafford this week? You do not need to be scared of the Jets defense. Their pass defense has been terrible. Dreadful, people. Since week 12, this is a pass defense that is allowing the 5th most passing yards per game and has allowed the 6th highest yards per attempt. Look, I know this game could possibly shoot out, and a lot of people are high on Aaron Rodgers. The Rams have a ton to play for. They are charging for the playoffs, and I think we get a great game out of Matthew Stafford this week. Get him into your lineups. Okay, moving from one team and a player that has a lot to play for over to a team that's pretty much out of it. They don't have a lot to play for outside of pride at this point. We have to discuss Travis Etienne. Right now coming in at RB28 in consensus. And I'm not telling you that, okay, look, this game is going to shoot out, but I think Etienne is he's going a little bit overlooked right now, considering what we saw from the backfield last week. I know in previous weeks we've seen this has been a near even split, or Tank Bigsby has gotten the early down work, and Travis Etienne has been regulated just to passing downs. That was not the case last week, and we could see this continue this week. If you look at last week's sample, Travis Etienne played 73% of the snaps. He had 18 touches and 85 total yards. So we're talking about a workhorse back who should be closer to being an RB2 this week than being ranked as an RB3. And he also got a 75% snap share when the team got into the red zone. We're not worried about the Raiders' defense, both passing or running. We think Travis Etienne can get workhorse usage again this week against the Raiders' defense that since week 10, they're middle of the road, 18th in rushing yards per game, so not scared of that. And his efficiency can be helped because he hasn't exactly been extremely efficient since he's come back. But facing a run defense that since week 10 has allowed the 12th highest yards after contact per attempt can definitely help pad the stats. So Travis Etienne should be an RB3, a flex play this week for you. He might produce as an RB2. Okay, so out of running backs over to wide receivers, and I'm going to go down the ladder. I'm going to go down deep into the well this week. Wide receiver 55, player that I'm high on this week, and I understand there's risk that comes with this. So I'm not telling you in most different leagues, 10-team leagues, you're not going to be starting him, but it's a 12-team formats, especially if you're going to be playing catch-up and you need ceiling from one of your flex spots. And I'm telling you there's risk to possibly absorb with this player, but I think he can walk away with a really, really good game this week. And that's Keon Coleman. Coming in an ECR wide receiver 55. And last week, was it great for Keon Coleman? No. He had a 45% route share. He only drew 2 targets. Yes, one of them was a big play. This is a great matchup. If you are the Buffalo Bills and you want to make a deep postseason run, which we all think Buffalo can do, yeah, you're going to need Khalil Shakir. Yes, you're going to need Amari Cooper, who probably draws shadow coverage from Christian Gonzalez this week. So do not play Amari Cooper. But outside of that, you need Keon Coleman revved up and ready to go because you are going to play good defenses in the playoffs. You're going to need all of these weapons firing on all cylinders. So this is a great week to get Keon Coleman going. This is a great week to ramp him up against the defense if we're looking at just the coverage matchup for Keon Coleman. Since week 9, New England has had the 5th highest single high rate in the NFL. Why does this matter? Because Keon Coleman this season against single high leads the team in 2.94 yards per route run and first downs per route run. So we're talking about, okay, outside of Christian Gonzalez, we've seen every single passing attack in the NFL have success throwing against this pass defense as long as you stay away from Gonzalez, who probably is going to be in the back pocket of Amari Cooper all day. Okay, well, that leads us to more Keon Coleman. And yeah, Khalil Shakir can have another good game. I'm not saying that he can't. But Keon Coleman could be a high upside flex play that's going to go overlooked this week. If you need the upside in the ceiling to catch up in your matchups, consider him for your lineups. Okay, again, going down the wide receiver well, and okay, you don't have to pinch your nose. I'm not going to sit here and have to do acrobatic backflips to make a case for this guy because he's been producing over the last 2 weeks consistently. A name that when Chris Godwin went down, everybody flocked to Jalen McMillan. And then he did nothing, and then he got hurt, and then he got buried in the consciousness of all fantasy GMs. Well, I'm here to tell you he's back, people. Over the last 2 weeks, Jalen McMillan, so since week 14, has a 21.4% target share. He has 2.68 yards per route run. All of these per route metrics are awesome. Not only that, he has averaged 67 receiving yards per game, and he has scored 3 touchdowns. This week he goes up against the Dallas secondary, which nobody should be worried about them at this point of the season. McMillan has been on a hot streak. He can continue it in week 16. If that's the case, you need to consider him as your wide receiver 3 or a flex play this week. All right, before we get to the last 4 players on this week's list, if you are juggling multiple fantasy football playoff teams and you're still feeling a little bit overwhelmed because of all the winning, FantasyPros is here to help you simplify things, people, with the FantasyPros Multi-League Assistant. You can see all the latest news, notes, and rankings for every single player across all of your playoff squads. It's all in one spot, making your path to victory and titles clear and easy. I want you to dive in today and let us help you dominate all of your leagues, grab the titles with the Multi-League Assistant at fantasypros.com/myplaybook or in the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Download it today. Okay, breaking into the top 4 of this week's list, I'm giving you a twofer. Two people. And again, we're going down the list because I know a lot of people are dealing with injuries and uncertainty in their lineups, and they don't know what to do with some of these players. You need to consider playing not only Romeo Doubs, but Christian Watson in your lineups this week. And I understand it. The first thing, and Pat Fitzmaurice and I talked about this on previous shows this week, so go check those out on the YouTube. We talked about this. Could the Packers just decide to run the ball and Jordan Love gets 20 passing attempts in this game? Yeah, that could happen. Definitely could. The flip side of that conversation is, could the Packers use this as an avenue to get Jordan Love right, to inject some life into this passing game? Because entering the playoffs and going down the stretch, this team, if they want to make it deep into the postseason, you're going to need to match up with a lot of different teams. You're going to need to match up with a lot of different game scripts. Not every game is going to allow you to just win by running the ball and hiding Jordan Love and not throwing the ball or taking deep shots calculated every single game. Some of these games, you might be forced to air it out with Jordan Love. So you've got to get confidence in these wide receivers. You got to inject life in this passing game. And this is a fantastic spot to do it against the New Orleans Saints this week. You look at Romeo Doubs, since week 3, New Orleans has had the 4th highest too high rate in the NFL. So utilizing this coverage on 55% of the defensive snaps, this matters because since week 7, against too high, Romeo Doubs has a 26% target per route run rate. He has a 25% first read share and almost 2.0 yards per route run. And this New Orleans secondary, nobody needs to be scared about them. No, you don't. Since week 10, they've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game and the 3rd highest PPR points per target to perimeter wide receivers. So, Romeo Doubs can walk away with another stellar week in week 16. And again, talking about Romeo Doubs, the second Green Bay Packer I'm going to give you here is not Jayden Reed. It is Christian Watson. And what have we seen out of Watson the last few weeks? Connecting with Jordan Love on deep passes, downfield shots, giving us ceiling games, and putting up lots of receiving yardage when he's done it. If he does that this week, Watson could be the guy that helps put your team over the top and move on to the championship round. And you're saying, okay, but if Jordan Love's not going to throw the ball much, okay, well then we need deep shots. Okay, well, that's what Christian Watson's been doing. Since week 7, almost 38% of his target volume has been on downfield passes. So now you're going to tell me, all right, well, this all sounds pretty good. But what have the Saints done against deep passing over the last few weeks? Well, since week 10, the New Orleans Saints are allowing the 7th most deep passing yards per game and the 12th highest pass rating to downfield targets. So, if Jordan Love is going to throw deep, Christian Watson is going to be a big part of it, and we could see ceiling performances from both of these guys this week for the Packers and a get-right game for this passing attack. Okay, moving from one passing attack that people don't know what to do with to another one, let's talk about a Chicago Bear here, people. Keenan Allen, wide receiver 32 in ECR this week. We've already seen this play out. We've seen this play out already. Keenan Allen, the last time he played against the Lions, 73 receiving yards, 2 scores. He was awesome. We could see him revisit that, and Keenan Allen's been heating up, people. Since week 11, he is the wide receiver 21 in fantasy points per game. He has 6 red zone targets since week 11. And we know, consistently, outside of all the injuries for the Detroit Lions defense, they've been bad against slot wide receivers the entire year. So it didn't even need injuries to get there. So Keenan Allen can produce again this week against a pass defense that this season has allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to slot wide receivers and the 2nd most receiving yards to that position. Keenan Allen is a wide receiver 3 in the ranks, probably the wide receiver 3 in all of your lineups. If he's still in your squads and you've made it this far and you're going to advance, Keenan Allen could put up wide receiver 2 numbers this week, be another top 20 week for the veteran wide receiver. Get him in your lineups. Okay, to the final player on this week's video, and we haven't talked about him much this season. That's because the coverage matchups have been bad, and honestly, Drew Petzing needs to take a hard look in the mirror and realize that he has grossly misused Marvin Harrison Jr. all season. But I lead off with that to say, this is the get-right game, people. This is the game where we see Marvin Harrison Jr. explode and be the guy we were hoping that he was going to be for most of the year, and this all comes down to the coverage matchup. Arizona Cardinals been facing a lot of too high coverage. I've talked about this in the primer over previous weeks, why Kyler's been bad, why Marv has been a ghost, but we've been seeing a ton of Trey McBride. Yes, I think Trey McBride scores, so I'll get that out of the way too. I think he gets a touchdown this week. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is also in a fantastic spot. You're looking at the Carolina Panthers secondary since week 12. They have the 7th highest single high rate. And this all matters because the splits between Marvin Harrison Jr. versus 2 high and single high have been Grand Canyon size. Like, whew. One over here is a good wide receiver you need to start. Over here is a guy that should never make your lineups. This week against single high, Marv can cook. You look at Marvin Harrison Jr. against single high this season, has almost a 23% target share, 2.05 yards per route run against single high, and a 28.2% first read share. The Carolina secondary has been got over the last few weeks. Since week 10, Carolina has given up the 9th most fantasy points per game to perimeter wide receivers. I have not been high on Kyler Murray nor Marvin Harrison Jr. for most of this season, especially the last few weeks, because the coverages they have faced this week is the get-right game. Get Marvin Harrison Jr. into your lineups and enjoy it. All right, everyone, that's this week's primer video. 8 players that you need to consider for your lineups that can give you ceiling, that could be awesome flex plays, wide receiver 3s, all of that stuff to get you to championship week in fantasy football. Again, head over to FantasyPros.com, read the primer for all my analysis. It will be updated all weekend up to kickoff on Sunday. Good luck in all of your matchups and use the multi-league assistant. I will see you next week.